Representative, having dedicated a dozen years to safeguarding presidents, I recognize a genuine threat to our nation, and frankly, the danger originates within this very chamber. Director of National Intelligence Dan Bongino stated while seated at the witness table of the House Intelligence Committee. His stance appeared at ease, yet his gaze remained piercing, reflecting the instincts of a veteran Secret Service agent trained to perceive peril before it manifested. He possessed the physique of someone who still prioritized 5 o'clock a.m. workouts, spoke with the grit of a New York beat cop, and carried a dossier substantial enough to ruin reputations. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar moved closer to her microphone, a recognizable sneer forming on her lips, the expression she reserved for those she deemed inferior. As the most outspoken member of her group, she had spent years refining the technique of the moralistic takedown, and she expected today to follow that pattern. "Mr. Bongino," she commenced, elongating his surname as if it left a sour taste. "Allow me to clarify my understanding of your suitability for this role. You are a podcast presenter, a personality on Fox News, and a figure who has profited for years by disseminating conspiracy theories to millions," she said while shuffling her documents carelessly, making no effort to conceal her disdain. "You were merely a bodyguard who stood outside rooms while genuine intelligence experts conducted the actual business, checking IDs and wearing an earpiece. Yet we are expected to accept you as qualified to head the U.S. intelligence community." She glanced around at her associates, silently encouraging them to partake in her scorn, causing AOC to nod in agreement while Rashida Tlaib smirked. "With all necessary respect, Director, and I use that title broadly, I have held a seat on this committee since before you knew what a skiff was," Omar continued. "I have received briefings on missions you have only encountered in classified files you likely failed to comprehend. So perhaps we should be the ones posing the inquiries today." The Democrats chuckled, and a few even clapped quietly, recognizing the fearless progressive who had challenged presidents and never retreated from a conflict. Bongino did not recoil. Instead, a faint smile appeared, the expression of a man who had been anticipating precisely this opportunity. "Are you finished?" he inquired softly, causing Omar's eyes to narrow as she responded, "Excuse me." "I asked if you have completed your performance." "Oh," he clarified, leaning forward slightly, "because, if you are done disparaging my credentials, I have several inquiries regarding yours." He opened the bulky file before him, and something flickered in Omar's gaze, the initial sign that this exchange might not proceed as she had anticipated. Bongino tapped the dossier and noted, "You really aren't going to appreciate these," causing Omar's smirk to waver for a split second. She regained her composure rapidly, but not fast enough, as the C-SPAN cameras had captured it and millions of spectators had witnessed the moment. The predator had just transformed into the quarry, and she was not yet aware of the shift. Bongino opened his file with the relaxed assurance of someone who had performed this act 1,000 times in interrogation cells and courtrooms where errors meant fatalities. "Before we discuss the specifics," he stated, his New York accent adding grit to his speech, "allow me to share a personal fact not listed on my CV." He stared straight at Omar and said, "On September 11th, 2001, I was with the NYPD. I was present. I watched those towers collapse, and I inhaled that dust filled with cement, steel, and human remains." His tone lowered as he added, "I lost companions that day. Brothers I had shared drinks with just a week prior. Men with children and wives and futures they would never get to experience, leaving 3,000 Americans slaughtered by terrorists who despised everything this nation represents. He hesitated, allowing the gravity of his words to descend upon the chamber, then said, "So, visualize my shock, Congresswoman, when I learned how you described that day." He retrieved a transcript and read, "March 23rd, 2019, at a CARE banquet where you were the keynote speaker, you stated that CARE was established after 9/11 because they realized that some people did something and that we were all beginning to lose our civil rights." He placed the transcript down and repeated, "Some people did something. Is that truly how you characterize the deadliest terrorist assault in American history? Just some people did something?" Omar's poise fractured slightly as she leaned in, her voice becoming sharp, insisting, "That quote was ripped entirely from its context. I was discussing the discrimination Muslims endured post-9/11 and the civil liberties that were affected." Bongino raised another paper, suggesting, "Let me read the complete context then, and perhaps that will clarify things." He recited the full paragraph unhurriedly and intentionally, ensuring every word resonated. And when he concluded, the room fell completely quiet. "It actually sounds worse within context," Bongino remarked, "because you weren't merely downplaying the attack, you were centering it on yourself and how Muslims were the true victims of 9/11 rather than the 3,000 deceased Americans or their families. You ignored the first responders who are still perishing from cancer related to that day," he continued, causing Omar's voice to elevate as she shouted, "This is Islamophobic, and you are exploiting a national tragedy to win political points against a Muslim woman." Bongino's voice sliced through the noise like a razor as he retorted, "I extracted corpses from that debris, Congresswoman. I carried fragments of human beings I could not identify while you stood before cameras and characterized the event like a parking citation that merely annoyed your specific community." He leaned in, his beat cop instincts taking command, and declared, "Here is the reality of 9/11. It wasn't just something. It was mass slaughter and an act of war. It involved 19 terrorists flying aircraft into structures with the intent of killing the maximum number of Americans. And every one of those terrorists would have been delighted to hear a U.S. Congresswoman define their assault as some people did something." Omar attempted to interject, claiming, "Oh, you are distorting my words." But Bongino countered, "I am reading your own words back to you." Bongino displayed the transcript, stating, "This is what you uttered. These are your vocabulary choices, and if they sound terrible, that is not my error, but yours." He placed the document down, adding, 3,000 Americans died, and you could not even trouble yourself to label it accurately," causing a murmur to ripple through the audience while someone whispered, "Oh my God," and a Republican member fought to suppress a smile. Bongino grasped another dossier and said, "But that is not the primary reason we are gathered here today. Let us discuss how you arrived here, literally how you entered this country, because I have inquiries regarding that matter." Omar's eyes expanded slightly, and for the first time an emotion resembling fear flashed across her visage. Bongino opened his second file with the systematic exactness of an investigator presenting proof, and remarked, "Now, I am merely a former police officer. I am not a prestigious immigration attorney or a scholar. Oh, just a fellow who spent 2 decades learning to identify when things do not calculate correctly," he said, his voice adopting a misleadingly informal tone. He produced a pile of papers and stated, "Congresswoman, numerous details regarding your personal history simply do not make sense." Omar sat upright in her seat, her expression solidifying into defiance, and asserted, These are racist falsehoods that have been disproven 1,000 times, and I will not dignify them. I haven't stated anything yet, Bongino interrupted, raising a hand. I only possess public records and items anyone can search for. So let me review them, and you can correct me where I am mistaken. He laid the papers across the desk and asked, In 2009, you wed a man named Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Is that correct? My private life is not the topic, she began, but he cut in. It is a matter of public record, so yes or no. Did you marry Ahmed Elmi in 2009? After a prolonged silence, she answered, Yes, to which Bongino replied, Thank you, before retrieving another document and noting, Now, this is where the situation becomes intriguing. Academic records from the 1990s indicate an Ahmed Elmi residing at your family's address, sharing your father's original surname, and falling within the same age bracket as your brother. Omar's voice spiked sharply as she yelled, This is a conspiracy theory. This has been addressed. But Bongino remained calm, asking, Tuasani, I am inquiring about documents. Are these school records forged, or did someone manufacture them? The accusations concerning my brother are racist fabrications disseminated by enemies, she insisted. But Bongino tilted his head and clarified, I never claimed he was your brother. I stated the records display someone named Ahmed Elmi at your family residence. You are the individual who introduced the concept of a brother, he noted, causing Omar to freeze with her mouth open but voiceless. Here is what I know, Bongino continued. In 2017, you divorced Ahmed Elmi. Yet you had been cohabitating with another man, your current spouse, since 2011, and you filed joint taxes with both men in the same years, 2014 and 2015. He displayed the tax forms and remarked, Now, I am not an accountant, but I am fairly certain you cannot file jointly with two separate husbands in the same year unless one of those unions was fraudulent. Omar erupted, standing up and pointing a finger at Bongino, screaming, How dare you attack my family? This is what they do to black Muslim women in this nation when we dare to speak truth to power. She pivoted to the chairman, her voice fracturing with anger, and demanded, Mr. Chairman, I insist this line of questioning be halted immediately. This is harassment, this is racism, and this is Islamophobia. The chairman shifted uneasily and stated, Congresswoman Omar, Director Bongino is inquiring about public records, and you are free to answer or decline to respond. Her voice broke as she turned back to Bongino, tears of rage shining in her eyes, and shouted, You are a racist, you are a white supremacist, and you represent everything that is defective in this country. Bongino waited until she concluded, then spoke with a voice that was almost tender, asking, Are you done? Here is what I have learned from 20 years in law enforcement, Bongino said softly. When you ask a person a straightforward question, and they reply with accusations and personal insults, it typically indicates they cannot answer the query. He displayed the documents and said, I asked about school transcripts and tax filings, and you labeled me a racist. That is not an answer, Congresswoman. That is a deflection. He placed the papers down and noted, The state of Minnesota investigated these claims, and they did not declare your innocence. They stated they couldn't prove anything because records were sealed or destroyed. Yet you paid fines for campaign finance violations found during that probe. He leaned forward and added, When someone pays a penalty, they are not demonstrating innocence. They are purchasing silence. So what were you buying? Omar opened her mouth, shut it, and opened it again. But no sound emerged. AOC leaned over to whisper something urgent, while Tlaib stared at her phone as if wishing to vanish into the screen. Bongino reached for another file, saying, But immigration matters are complex legal gray zones, I understand. So let us discuss something simpler. Money, specifically campaign funds intended to elect progressives. He smiled, though it was not friendly, and said, "Let's talk about where your funds actually went. But wait until you hear about the $2.8 million." Bongino opened the third folder with the contentment of a prosecutor presenting his strongest evidence, stating, "In the Secret Service, we had a motto: follow the money. It never lies. People lie, documents lie, but money always reveals the truth." He retrieved a dense stack of financial records and said, "So I tracked your money, Congresswoman," and it narrated quite a tale. Omar had regained some poise, but her voice was cautious now as she stated, "My campaign finances are entirely transparent and have been audited by Tim Minett." Bongino simply said, "Tim Minett, the political consultant who ran a firm called E Street Group, the firm your campaign paid." Bongino made a theatrical display of checking his notes and read, "Over $2.8 million cumulative over several election cycles." He looked up and remarked, "That is a substantial amount for consulting services, particularly from a campaign that constantly speaks about removing money from politics." "My campaign engaged a legitimate firm to perform legitimate tasks, so there is nothing odd about it," she argued. "When did you begin sleeping with him?" The words hung in the atmosphere like a live grenade. Omar's face twisted with fury as she stammered, "How dare—" But Bongino interrupted, "It is a legitimate question." He held up a paper and said, "This is a divorce filing from 2019 where Tim Minett's wife at the time named you as the cause for her divorce, claiming her husband admitted he was leaving her for you." He set the document down and continued, "The payments to his firm began in 2018, and the affair was occurring in 2019 at the very least. So you were paying millions of dollars to a man you were romantically involved with using donor funds." Omar attempted to deflect, saying, "Let's discuss your money, Director, and how much Fox News paid you to disseminate falsehoods about the election and COVID." "Sure," Bongino shrugged. "I earned money in media, built a company, took risks, worked hard, and succeeded. I will release any financial record you wish to view." He leaned forward and asked, "Will you do the same? Will you release the contracts between your campaign and E Street Group and show us exactly what services were provided for $2.8 million? When silence followed, he asked, "Will you explain why payments increased drastically around the same time your relationship became intimate?" Bongino held up another document and stated, "Here is what the FEC discovered: multiple violations, improper payments, and a lack of documentation, resulting in your campaign paying fines once again." He set it down and said, "You know what this looks like to someone who spent 20 years investigating felonies. It looks like you utilized campaign funds as a personal bank account and paid your boyfriend millions while he was still married to another woman. It looks like the progressive champion who campaigns against money in politics was operating one of the most financially dubious campaigns in Congress," he concluded. Omar's voice was shaking now with rage or fear. It was difficult to distinguish as she claimed, This is a smear campaign orchestrated by—" But Bongino held up the file, saying, "This is your FEC file. These are your campaign's own financial disclosures and documents your team submitted, so if they are a smear, you smeared yourself," he noted while gathering the papers. "Here is the issue, Congresswoman. You have spent years lecturing Americans about corruption, money in politics, and special interests. Yet the whole time you were committing exactly what you accused everyone else of doing." He shook his head and added, "In my neighborhood, we had a word for that. We called it hypocrisy, but that isn't even the worst part. He reached for his final folder, the thickest one yet, and said, "The worst part is what you said about other Americans, about their loyalty and their patriotism, so let's discuss that." Bongino placed the final folder on the table with the seriousness of a judge pronouncing a sentence, and when he looked up at Omar, the prosecutorial intensity had shifted to something deeper and more personal. February 10th, 2019, Taiki Anabuhais. He began, his voice quieter now. "You sent a tweet. Do you recall this tweet, Congresswoman?" Omar remained silent, her face having turned pale, as Bongino produced a printed screenshot and said, "You were responding to a journalist who asked about Republican support for Israel, and you wrote, 'It's all about the Benjamin's baby.'" He set down the screenshot and explained, "For anyone unaware, Benjamin's refers to $100 bills, meaning you were implying that American politicians support Israel because they are being paid by Jewish money." Omar found her voice, though it was weaker now, saying, "I apologized for that tweet and admitted it was," but Bongino cut her off, saying, "You apologized because you were caught. You apologized because even your own party leadership condemned you, and Nancy Pelosi called it a deeply offensive use of anti-Semitic tropes." Bongino stated, "Your apology was not remorse, it was damage control," he added, pulling out another document. "But it wasn't just the tweet, was it?" Month later, you suggested that American Jews possess allegiance to a foreign country, implying dual loyalty, which is the oldest anti-Semitic slur in the book, he said while spreading multiple printouts across the table. "You have spent years questioning whether American Jews are truly loyal to America, whether their support for Israel means they prioritize another country, and whether they can be trusted," he said, looking directly at her. "You have accused American citizens of divided loyalties, of placing money above principle, and of being corrupted by a foreign power." He paused. "And the entire time, you are the one with unresolved questions regarding your immigration. And you are the one who paid your boyfriend millions in campaign funds. You are the one who minimized the worst terrorist attack in American history. And you are the one who has been fined repeatedly for financial violations," he said, leaning forward. "You possess some nerve, Congresswoman, some genuine nerve," he remarked, as Omar tried to rally by saying, "I have been a voice for the voiceless, and I have stood up for—" But Bongino's voice dropped to become almost intimate. "Let me tell you a story. In 1992, a little girl is living in a refugee camp in Kenya. Her family fled the Somali civil war with warlords and death everywhere, and she has nothing, no home, no safety, and no future. Then America said, 'Yeah,' and this country you spend so much time criticizing opened its doors to that little girl and her family, flew them across the ocean, gave them safety, gave them opportunity, and gave them a chance." His voice hardened as he said, "That little girl grew up to become a United States Congresswoman in a single generation, from refugee to lawmaker, which happens only in America. Only in this America you call racist, Islamophobic, and fundamentally broken." He stood slowly and asked, "And what did you do with that gift?" "You stood in front of cameras and claimed 9/11 was just some people did something, and you accused American Jews of dual loyalty, while questions about your own loyalty remain unanswered. You took millions in donor money and paid it to your married boyfriend. You used every advantage this country provided you. And then you spent your career telling everyone how terrible it is," he said, pointing at the folder of tweets. That is what you said about Americans who disagree with you, that it's all about the Benjamins, that they are bought, that they are corrupt, and that they cannot be trusted. He leaned over the table, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but carrying to every corner of the room, and said, "But here is my question, Congresswoman. You accuse everyone else of divided loyalties, everyone else of putting money first, and everyone else of betraying this country." He looked directly into her eyes and asked, "When exactly did you start believing the rules don't apply to you? And when did America go from being your salvation to being your target? When did the country that pulled you out of a refugee camp and made you a congresswoman become the country you blame for everything?" he asked, straightening up. "Because, from where I am sitting, the only person in this room with a loyalty problem is you," he concluded, and the silence that followed was absolute. Ilhan Omar sat frozen, her mouth slightly open and her eyes wide, trying to speak as her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then the squad began to depart, starting with Ayanna Pressley, the Massachusetts congresswoman who had been Omar's ally since day one. Now Pressley was gathering her papers with careful deliberation, looking neither at Omar nor anyone else, as she stood, walked to the side door, and slipped out without a single word. Omar's eyes followed her, confusion mixing with betrayal, realizing Ayanna was leaving her behind. Then Cori Bush, the same Louis Firebrand, who never backed down from anything, was suddenly fascinated by her phone. She typed something quickly, stood, and walked out through the main door without glancing at Omar. AOC tried. She actually attempted to intervene, saying, "Mr. Chairman, I move that we take a brief recess," her voice unsteady. "The gentle lady's motion is out of order, as this is a witness hearing, not a business meeting," the chairman ruled, cutting her off. AOC sat back defeated, looking at Omar and realizing this wasn't a battle they could win, but a massacre they needed to escape. So she mouthed something, maybe "I'm sorry," and began gathering her things. Rashida Tlaib was the last to go, standing abruptly with her face contorted in fury, shouting, "This is a disgrace! This is McCarthyism! This is—" before being told she was out of order. "I don't care about your order. This is a political assassination, and I will not," she yelled as security guards started moving toward her. She looked around wildly, realized she was alone and that even her squad sisters had fled, let out a sound of pure frustration, and stormed toward the exit, slamming the door hard enough to shake the water glasses. Ilhan Omar, who had entered this hearing room with 4 allies ready to defend her, sat alone at the committee table surrounded by empty chairs where her friends used to be. The woman who had spent years demanding loyalty from others had just learned what her own loyalty was worth, and the collapse came slowly, then all at once. Her hand, the one that had been pointing at Bongino with such righteous fury, began to tremble, and though she tried to lower it, she couldn't seem to control her own arm. You can't," her voice cracked, the words dying before they could form, and tears were streaming down her face now. Not the calculated tears of a politician performing grief, but the hot, angry tears of someone who had lost control completely. She reached for her water glass, but her hand was shaking so badly that she knocked it over instead, causing water to spread across the table, soaking her notes and dripping onto her lap. She didn't even seem to notice, her breathing becoming ragged as the microphone picked up every gasping inhale, her chest heaving as she struggled to find air or words. "I am a refugee. I came here with nothing." "You don't get to," she stammered, unable to finish. Her mouth kept moving, But no sound emerged, just wet, choked sounds that the microphone broadcast to millions of viewers, while the C-SPAN camera zoomed in, capturing every tremor and desperate glance around the room for help that would never come. Her squad was gone. The Democrats were frozen in their seats, and the chairman watched silently, making no move to intervene, knowing nobody was going to save her. Ilhan Omar, the firebrand and provocateur who had stood on the House floor and lectured America about its sins, sat frozen in her chair, destroyed by her own words, abandoned by her own allies, and unable to defend herself against simple questions. Bongino gathered his folders slowly, neither gloating nor smiling, just collecting his documents with the quiet efficiency of a man who had finished his job. "I have no further questions for Congresswoman Omar," he said to the chairman. "I think she has answered everything the American people needed to hear." He paused at the door, adding, "Or rather, she couldn't answer, which tells them everything they need to know," and then he walked out. Behind him, the cameras kept rolling on Ilhan Omar's motionless form, alone at the table with water dripping onto the floor and tears still streaming, surrounded by empty chairs and the ruins of everything she had built. The image would define her career, and 40 million Americans watched it happen in real time, witnessing a systematic dismantling of the carefully constructed image she had spent years building. For years, she had positioned herself as untouchable, treating any criticism as racism, any question as Islamophobia, and any investigation as persecution. She had wielded her identity as both sword and shield, attacking her opponents as bigots while deflecting all scrutiny of her own conduct. And it worked, until someone decided to simply ignore the accusations and ask the questions anyway. Dan Bongino didn't call her names, he didn't attack her religion, and he didn't question her right to serve in Congress. He just read documents, asked questions, pointed out inconsistencies, and let the silence speak for itself. The days following the hearing were chaos for Omar's office, as her official statement, released 6 hours later, accused Bongino of a racist witch hunt designed to silence a black Muslim woman. It mentioned Islamophobia 11 times and white supremacy 4 times, but it mentioned the specific allegations about her finances, her marriage, and her statements exactly 0 times. The statement was mocked mercilessly online, with one viral tweet observing, "She's still doing it, still calling everyone racist instead of answering questions. Did she learn nothing?" The squad held a press conference the next morning, or tried to, where AOC stood at the podium clearly uncomfortable and delivered a statement about the weaponization of congressional hearings against women of color. She did not take questions, and neither did Tlaib, Presley, or Bush, all of whom stood behind AOC with expressions that ranged from defiant to deeply uncertain. Notably, Ilhan Omar was not present, her office claiming she was unavailable, while reporters who staked out her home said no one had entered or left in 2 days. The hashtag #OmarExposed trended for 72 consecutive hours, the longest political hashtag trend of the year, and the clip of Bongino's final question, "When did America become your enemy?" was viewed over 100 million times. 1 week after the hearing, a reporter caught Dan Bongino at a law enforcement memorial event in New York, while the clip was still everywhere. "Director, some people are saying you went too far, that you were cruel, and that you bullied a sitting congresswoman on national television," the reporter asked. Bongino considered the question, shook his head slowly, and replied, "I asked questions, I showed documents, and I read her own words back to her. If asking a public official to explain their public statements is too far, then we've completely lost the ability to hold anyone accountable." the reporter pressed regarding the personal nature of the marriage questions. But Bongino interrupted, "That's not personal, that's public. That's campaign finance. And that's exactly what we should be asking about." He paused and said, "Here is the thing. For years, Congresswoman Omar has called people racists for asking basic questions and used her identity as a shield to deflect any accountability whatsoever. It worked because the media backed off and her colleagues backed off. Everyone was too scared of being called a bigot to do their job," he explained with a shrug. "I am not scared of being called names. I spent 12 years getting shot at to protect presidents and years on the streets of New York dealing with real criminals. So you think I'm going to back down because some politician calls me a racist?" A slight smile crossed his face as he added, "She had every opportunity to answer those questions, explain the tax filings, release the campaign contracts, or address the 9/11 comments with something other than Islamophobia. But she chose to attack instead." He looked directly at the camera and said, "That tells you everything you need to know. When someone can't answer simple questions about their own conduct, it is usually because the answers are worse than the questions." The reporter asked about the squad's response and the accusations of racism, to which Bongino almost laughed, saying, "I protected President Obama for years, and I would have taken a bullet for him. I did take risks for him, and these people want to call me a white supremacist?" he asked, shaking his head. "That word used to mean something. It used to describe actual evil people who wanted to hurt others because of their race," he continued. "Now it is just what they call you when you ask inconvenient questions, and they've turned it into a joke," he said. "The real tragedy is that when actual racism happens, people won't believe it, because the word has been so overused," he concluded, straightening his jacket. Congresswoman Omar made a choice. She could have been a serious public servant and used her incredible story of refugee to congresswoman to inspire people and bring them together. Instead, she used it as a weapon to attack, to divide, and to deflect from her own conduct, he said, turning to walk toward the memorial. "Put up or shut up, that's what we used to say in New York. If you make accusations, you better be able to back them up." She accused everyone else of corruption and divided loyalty. But when someone finally asked if maybe those accusations applied to her too, she couldn't put up, so she should have shut up, he said, walking inside. On television screens across America, the clip of Omar's collapse played again, showing the trembling hands, the streaming tears, and the empty chairs where her allies had fled. The question that couldn't be answered, "When did America become your enemy?" echoed while in Minneapolis, in a house that had once hosted celebrations of her historic election. Ilhan Omar sat in darkness. Her phones went unanswered, and her future remained uncertain as she faced the consequences of years of accusations that had finally been turned back on her. She had spent her career questioning everyone else's loyalty. But now, America was questioning hers. And she had no answer. If you believe that asking questions is not racism, that accountability is not Islamophobia, and that every public servant should answer for their conduct regardless of background, hit subscribe. Share this with everyone who is tired of being called names for demanding the truth.